I'm here tonight with Steve Hogan. So you know, you'll be seeing a lot of Steve tonight and a little bit of me. I want to come fall when we have more meetings, you'll see a lot of me and maybe just a little Steve. But I appreciate you adjusting your schedules to come at a different time than we originally had planned. I had a bicycle accident and my jaw's wired shut, and I'm not breathing through a trach hole anymore, which was an unsightly thing and didn't sound very good either. So I'm slowly getting on the mend, and we had to postpone a few things because we didn't have backup plans in place, and that was my fault. So I appreciate you adjusting the time and being able to come tonight.
HIPAA laws prevented you from doing the Zoom from the hospital.
That's right. The ICU room wouldn't let me set up a Zoom call. So anyway, we're here tonight, and the presentation, well, I think will be right around 40 minutes. We're here afterwards for as many questions or concerns you want to share. I'm going to be trying to capture a lot of those in writing. We're also recording this as well, and we hope that as time goes on, it can give we can get some, not only some insight for you as far as our process and procedure over the next about 7, 8, 9 months as a district, but we'll also help you understand a little bit more the not just the what, but also the why we're doing, why we're looking at and considering options that we'll be considering. So I'll turn the time over to Steve, and thanks again for coming.
I'm going to try the microphone. Move this. So again, thanks for being here. But whether it's 5 or 500, I kind of prefer the 500 because that means word's getting out. So we'll get there eventually. So again, my name is Steve Hogan. I am, you see me listed as consultant, and that's partly true. My background is an educator. I'm an educator, teacher, principal for 17 years, and the last about 10 years doing planning, boundary work outside of Salt Lake. I do not work and am not an employee of Salt Lake City School District. Mostly here, though, is professional courtesy and to help a friend that's struggling. He said he did in the bike accident that actually happened in the first meeting we held with patrons. Just kidding, just kidding. It was a serious bike accident, and when he can take this over, then fantastic. So I'm going to go through this. I'll go through it as quickly, but hopefully not too quick. If you want me to stop on any slides or return to slides, I'll be glad to do that. But I tend to go through these fairly quickly to save most of our time for questions. But again, feel free to stop me at any point, and we'll go to that point and just jump right in. By the way, how many, don't have to show of hands, but I'm just curious, parents? Okay, great, fantastic. Employees, teachers, just anyone else, just concerned stakeholders, anything, and that's great. I want all comers, whether you're parents or have a child or not in the district, never have, doesn't matter. This stuff matters to everyone. It's important. So let's jump in. So again, this is what we're talking about. Just so you know, you're in the right meeting here at the library. District reconfigurations and long-term school closures. By the way, I won't distract too much. Big picture, very big picture. These things are happening all over the country. This is not unique to Salt Lake City School District. It's not unique to Utah, although we probably see in our share. But what is happening in Utah specifically is along the Wasatch Front. Along the Wasatch Front, all the way from north to south, but especially in Davis County, Utah County, Salt Lake County, the east side, the east bench is the older part, and is where the more mature part of the district is. So in other words, fewer students that we're seeing. So you combine that with a lower birth rate across the country, even here in Utah with a lower birth rate. Combine that with more charter and private schools and online schools and other options, and even trying to figure out still what's happening after COVID and mobility and other issues and just changing demographics. It's hitting Salt Lake pretty hard. We'll go over that in just a second. But I wanted you to know this is not unique at all. So it's, we know that if you've been around very long, that not too long ago, in the 80s and 90s, a lot of schools were too large, and we had that problem. We had year-round schools, we had odd schedules, all kinds of crazy things. We had portable classrooms everywhere, just odd things to handle the workload. But now, a lot of districts have the opposite problem, and we don't have as many students. So that's really the crux of the meeting. What are the commitments from the district? Just as you see there, strive for quality district programs and opportunities. If I could put those in this presentation in a nutshell, it's to increase or improve outcomes and opportunities for students and families, of course, but students. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. Provide ongoing educator learning so classrooms reflect best teaching practices. And again, I'll go into that a little bit. Fiduciary responsibility, in other words, is money or budgets part of this? Sure. They're not the number one. You get that question all the time. Every district that has this challenge, they typically hear, you're just doing this to save money. Close a few schools to save money. That can be, it may be a byproduct of that, but it's not the goal and shouldn't be the goal of boundary change or closure. And I'll explain that in a second also. And also the sustainability and environmental responsibility. Looking at the schools, what works best for buildings sometimes and therefore the kids. Quick history from 2012 to 22, the last 10 years, there were about 25,000 10 years ago. Now down to, well, we're down almost 4,500 students, Salt Lake City. So that's 18% in 10 years. That's a fairly significant drop. Davis Demographics, a private consulting company, K-12 demographic consulting company specific to K-12, came in a few years ago, was it 2017, Brian?
Yeah.
And helped with this data. A lot of districts around the state and around the country use Davis Demographics to help make these trends, help explain these trends. So about 5,000 now. The other part of that is that will likely continue for a couple of years, probably for a few thousand more. We will see, and again, it's just under 20,000 now. Salt Lake City School District is similar to other districts in the valley, especially on the east side. It's probably going to be a couple more years of some decline, then level out at that point. And that's only with the population. I'm not talking about could there be more charter schools or other issues like that come up, of course. So, yes?
I'm just going to make a point in that I understand in general in the Wasatch Front, there's the shift from east to west. That's less pronounced in Salt Lake City proper. Most of the east side schools aren't under threat of closure. The thing that hasn't been captured in what we've discussed thus far is the composition of household types likely to live in the center city don't have children or have few children. In Salt Lake is more urban than the other places, hence fewer children. So I'm just making that point.
That's a valid point. It's a great point. No, I haven't talked about that yet, but let me just confirm. Yes, I agree. Very much so in Salt Lake City School District, especially, where we're seeing that also in other parts of the state, where it wasn't that long ago, even 7 or 8 years ago, when a district or demographer could get a good, accurate, what's called yield rate from the number of units in a project, whether it's single family homes or high density or whatever. That's more and more difficult now. But yes, so I'm familiar with the study that happened recently where a small geographic area, not too far from here, added about 8,000 units, all different kinds, but 8,000 units. Now, almost all of those were what were considered market rate. That's just whatever the market will bear. And the district was expecting hundreds of students out of those because that's what you would typically get. I think there were about 75 students, maybe, from those. those. I've seen another one recently that a 4-building complex had about 150 students. They gutted it because it was largely subsidized. They gutted it, made it market rate. Two students. The type of housing can make all the difference in the world. Where we used to get excited and a little antsy about new growth and always trying to watch it. And it matters. We still have to watch it. Everyone does. But you're absolutely right. Long story short is it makes a huge difference. And I can come back to that or spend some time after if you like. Okay, again, looking at these, specifically looking at K-6 from 13 down to 10. Okay? And again, by the way, this is largely focused on elementary schools. I want to say that correct, Brian. I mean, there's always can be a ripple effect from feeder patterns and those changes, but this is largely an elementary issue. Boundary studies in Utah are based on 2 things, framed around 2 things. One is state law. There are state laws and, that you have to carefully follow, and if you don't, legislators get upset. You might have seen a few of those in the news recently. So that's one, that they involve timelines and communications to stakeholders. The other is board policy. Those 2 things. You combine those 2 things, that's what a district has to follow. So in this one, in fact, I'm not going to read all that, but it's there. In fact, this PowerPoint will be at some point soon, I don't know the exact date, but it will be on the district website. Posted on the website, so you can go read all of this. And again, I'll come back and go over things you want to go over. Sorry, I keep getting out of the frame. So in that, this is the crux of the policy. People say, well, what considerations are there? What considerations are there for potentially changing a boundary or closing a school? Enrollment, right at the top. But you know what? There are these and more. In fact, you see there in no particular order or no priority. And that's important. That's important. We probably should bold that and put it in red because it really is important. Every study is different. Absolutely. If you see a school that's tiny, it's small, then it's gonna there's gonna be red flags. Look at that school. But there are a lot of other things also that are important. I won't read through all of those, but you can see that have to be considered when looking at potential closures. Okay? Any questions on that? I can potentially come back to that. It's the same list with a little more input. By the way, community input, that's what we're doing now, of course. And I promise you, I've seen a few of these, and even though our numbers may be few tonight, they'll get more and more. We'll have a few in the next couple of meetings. And in the fall, when we start to narrow the focus on specific areas or schools, perhaps, yeah, of course, we'll have more folks, more input. But please, please, please share this message. Let your neighbors know so we can get more input. Student safety, walking routes, transportation. Cover all of this. The district demographics, you can see, this is a very diverse district. Those things are taken into consideration as they should be. More, the school enrollment data, facility, capacity, and design. Does it make sense for most school districts, and I'm not speaking here for Salt Lake City School District or their board, if you have a brand new school that just happens to be built in the last couple of years, pretty dang close to a school that's 90 years old and struggling with facility, you're likely to look at the older building first because that just makes probably more sense in most cases. But facilities, yeah, it's not the end-all be-all, but it matters. Geographic features, special programs, absolutely, all of those things. All of these things, the financial implications. We need to have the right to a number of schools for the number of classes of students we have. That's what I'm going to talk about in just a second, spend a minute on. Legislative audit. And was this about a year ago?
No, December 2022, not even 6 months ago.
Okay, so it just came out.
Yep.
As I get older, I cannot tell, I can't keep up with time anymore.
No.
So somewhere between 5 years ago and 3 months ago. So recently the legislative audit came out and had some pretty strong recommendations. And Salt Lake City School District Board, of course, is aware of this and are considering some of these. You can see down here, one of the recommendations is that it should evaluate possible elementary schools for permanent closure. So again, it's another voice, it's another person. And, you know, hey, maybe it's, everything needs to be looked at. Davis demographics says, what other outside entities, what inside data tells you, everything. But this is just part of the formula is, okay, there was an audit, the audit says this, let's look at that, let's consider it. You can spend hours if you want to, I think that's a long audit summary. So this is critical, finding the right size for each grade in each elementary school that offers solutions. So let me paraphrase that or try to, because this is really important. It does get to the foundations of a lot of what's happening here. We've known for a long time that schools can be too big, like I mentioned earlier, and a lot of schools are too big around the country, but not as much anymore. There are a few that still struggle with that. Schools can also be too small. And let me clarify a few things when I say too small. I'm not talking about a number of students in a classroom. In the state in general, we still believe we wish you had more funding so we could have fewer students per class. But if you have 1,000 students in a classroom, you have a ratio that says, well, that means you get more teachers. If you have 250 to 300 students in a school, then you get fewer teachers. Well, what happens is we understand now that when you get below 3 teachers minimum per grade level in elementary, you start to get these wide variances, ebbs and flows. But your class sizes don't necessarily get smaller. In fact, you might get one small class, but your other one is very large. You get a lot of fluctuations. And for many, many reasons, bottom line is what generally we're trying to achieve. When I say we, school districts in general, is a minimum of 3 teachers per grade level in elementary school. Preferably 4 to 5, with some considerations depending on the size of the building, the types of programs they have, things like that, and some other things. But I'm giving you the very basics. So that's what we talked about there. Dual language, effective collaboration. Collaboration can be everything. And let me back up for a second and say something about small schools or too large. 2 things are the most important, first of all. First is the structure that you have outside of school and some sort of home environment, but outside of school. The support and structure you have there is, research tells us, is number 1 factor for success. After that, then we're looking at teachers in the classroom. An all-star teacher, and we have quite a few of them, can handle almost anything. Fortunately, we have a lot of those that have small classes, large classes, anything. Am I saying that every student that's ever been in a building or a school that's too large or too small is getting a poor education? No. What we are talking about, that, though, is in general, best practice. We've seen over and over now that we want to be kind of in a sweet spot. Most administrators will tell you there's a sweet spot for every level, elementary, junior high, and high school. But we're mostly talking about elementaries at this point. So that sweet spot that we're really focusing on at this point is that minimum 3 teachers per grade level, and if possible to get 4 teachers, maybe even 5 per grade level, assuming, again, capacity of the building and some other factors, that would be closer to the ideal. So again, I just basically summarize what's here. Space, it helps with these things. Music, other programs, minimize teachers having to do split classes, first and second graders, second and third and fourth, and so on. Again, great teachers can do it, but it's not ideal for our great teachers. Some of the things that happen. Again, keep in mind that schools are funded based on the number of students. You have more students, more teachers, fewer students, fewer teachers. But again, besides the things I just mentioned about the fluctuations or size of classrooms, there are other things that happen. You have 2 pots of money. You have that part that I just talked about, with it's the student-teacher ratio. Then you have other monies. When you're talking TSSA funds, trust lands, Title I funds, any ESSER funds, any funds that are outside of that, sometimes considered soft monies, federal monies, state monies. And most districts get quite a bit of that. That's where you supplement your programs. It's those. That also is on a per pupil ratio, if you will, or just a per pupil standard. So if you have 1,000 students or 600, you're getting more money than a school that has 250 students. Why is that so important? That helps fill the gaps in all those areas that you need. Behavioral health assistants, special ed aides, cafeteria, lunchroom, PE, social workers, to expand contracts, part-time teachers. There are about 18 other areas. And if you talk to any principal, especially in elementary, they'll talk to you all day long about these challenges of the small schools. The other things that happen, we see a lot, are just quite frankly, burnout. Small schools have to do the same things that large schools do. That's the same number of committees, the same number of assignments. That means the same teachers doing those over and over. If any of you here are on a school community council in a small school, you're probably also on the PTA. You're probably also doing fundraising. You're probably also doing 3 or 4 other things. And that's great, but eventually you wear out also, and we see that over and over to the point where some families literally move because they're tired. We've surveyed and found that it's hard for the families also. Efficient use of support educators is compromised, just like I mentioned. Then it starts getting into some of the other realities. Again, if you have 2 smaller schools, does it make sense to combine those? If everything else is equal and the same, and you have 2 small schools, and that you could run efficiently together with 1 principal perhaps, or and 1 assistant, and 1 head custodian, 1 principal secretary, or the same staff, then that makes sense. And districts and boards owe that to the public to consider those options. And again, that gets into the money. It's about being fiscally responsible for the use of the building itself and the district resources needed to maintain that building, to water the grass, to take care of the building. Questions on this part? Again, I will be glad to come back. A reminder about board members. In most districts, this is the way, and that is that board members have individual precincts, and you can see, I don't know, I think you can see most of them with some of the schools labeled on there. Brian, what was it? You got to remind me. We talked about this earlier. What was the one key thing you wanted to remind everyone?
So one of the misconceptions we see often is people say, hey, when you're looking at school closures, let's just study a precinct at a time. Let's look at this precinct or that precinct. The problem with that is that precincts are designated based on total population, not population of students in an area, but total population. So to this gentleman's point earlier, here's our downtown area. We have 1 elementary school. The elementary schools are red. That's just a playground there. That's not, but in this precinct is 1 elementary school because we have a lot of people in that area. We just don't have a lot of 5 to 18-year-olds in that area. So, and then we have others that have 5 or more elementary schools in that precinct. So instead of what can sometimes come out of looking precinct by precinct, which is number of schools in those precincts, the politics of this is an elected official, all that. Instead of looking precinct by precinct, we're going to show you another way we decided to start looking at it based on the major areas in our city. So if you click through, there's nothing magical where the black lines are. The black lines could have been drawn 3 blocks south or 3 blocks north or 3 blocks west or 3 blocks east. We're just showing you the general area of Rose Park, Glendale, avenues in downtown, and Sugar House. So these are the major kind of areas that we all know in our city by just the common name that they have. And we're going to dig into that.
Anyway, you can see those areas. Precincts have to be adjusted typically every 10 years with the census. So not whenever the census data is released, then districts have to reevaluate precincts to adjust for shifts in population. So just as you were mentioning there, Brian. So those 4 areas, in just a second I'll go through a few slides and talk about areas 1, 2, 3, and 4, and so on. You can see there, of course, and I'll show you area 1, 7 elementaries, 5, 7, 8. Those are the approximate areas. Okay. to go back for a second. Before I go over this part, I want to make something very clear. All this what I'm about to show, it really is a math problem. And this math problem comes from the Davis Demographics, the consultants that say simply, because they don't look at the politics and the nuances of a district. Really, they're looking at two things. They're looking at population and the number of schools you have. And you tell them, hey, in general, how many students do you want per building? It's just a real simple math problem. Then they give back what I'm about to show you, and that is they might recommend what an area looks like, an approximate area. Then they say, based on the number of buildings you have, then based on the number of students in that area, we recommend, or we think you should think about how many buildings you have, or therefore how many buildings you close. This is not a recommendation, this is not a goal. This is simply one way of looking at it that focuses on one thing, and that's enrollment. Well, two things, enrollment and the number of buildings. Okay, so I just want to say that over and over. Please don't leave and say, hey, they're talking about closing 2 or 3 schools in every area. No, it's simply one way of looking at that math problem of the number of buildings with the number of students in that area, and I can go back over that. But just so I wanted to preface that, so no one comes out of their seat when they see some of these. So area 1, again, 7 schools in that area. You see the list of 7, and they're so analytical or so data-driven that they, oops, too far. So all they do is say total number of students enrolled in that area, 2,300. Students that are residing in that area. So in other words, we have students coming and going because we live in a state that has open enrollment. So I have to break that down. But if you have 7 schools and you base it just on that with approximately, because that's the number of students that the average school would have if you're trying to get those 3 to 4 teachers per grade level. So that's where that 550 number comes from. So take that and just a simple division, and they say, hey, you need 4.18 schools. They don't even bother to round down or up. They stick with the numbers. But that is kind of, frankly, the beauty of consultants. They're from out of state. They come in and give you this data, which is nice for a district. But they don't care about our politics. They don't care about our feelings or any of those things. They just say data very well. So again, you can look at again residing. So 4 to 5 schools. That would mean if you were looking just at that, you only need 5 instead of 7. Area 2, 5. Now again, this one's a little different because there are 5 schools, but you see the asterisk at the bottom for the K-5 school feeding to Glendale Middle. This is the only area with all the K-5 schools, right? As I understand it. So that's the option if you're looking at it as is with the K-5. It goes from 5 down to 3, 4. So potentially close according to them. You could close one according to those numbers. But if you went with the K-6 option where the district decided, hey, we want actually 6th graders to be in the elementaries, this is what it would look like. Okay. Area 3, same thing. Again, I won't spend too much time because you're able to go back and see this, all of this, but the schools listed in that area, the math, how that, keep hitting the wrong one, the math, how that works out with that many students. If I remember right, is it area 3 or area 4 that has more of the?
4 has the magnet yield. Yeah.
So yeah, this one gets interesting because you notice that in this school, there are 8 schools in this area. But if you look at the number enrolled, 3,200, yet only 2,700-ish live in the area. Yeah, there were more 3 magnet schools.
3 magnet schools for ELP programs.
So they're coming in from out of the area to this area to attend schools of those programs, which are great. Every district had programs. And that's another, again, consideration is it's not just number of students, it's not just building condition, it's not just enrollment, it's programs. And where those programs are placed, where do you want them placed? Okay, that part fairly clear. So knowing all this, knowing the background, the board approved, study all elementary schools in Area 1 for potential boundary change, including possible closures. And I won't read it, but it says the same thing for Area 1, Area 2, Area 3, Area 4. Any boundary changes, school closures would be for the 24-25 school year. We are not, Salt Lake City is not talking about this coming school year, very clear. It would be, at the very least, fall of 24, the following school year. And I'll show you a little bit more about the timeline in just a second.
Hey, Steve. I think one big important piece that came out of this with the school board was past practice by other school boards in our city has been, should we close this particular school or that particular school? Some of you have been around long enough to remember Lowell, Roslyn Heights. There was discussion of and it didn't go through, but one other school as well, Benyon, a number of years ago, about 7, 8 years ago. I think that the value, even though this can feel, like a lot at once, it isn't about let's just look at one school in the community, where it's more of let's consider our entire Salt Lake City school district and try to put the pieces in place, look at options and recommendations for the whole district, because it isn't like we have, oh, it's just Rose Park area that has way too many schools for the number of students. It isn't just Sugar House, that they have way too many schools for the number of students. You could see from the past that we've kind of got this problem with declining enrollment, and we got to address it as a whole district right out of the gates. So I think that was the impetus behind what the school board said is we're not going to look at just 1 or 2 areas. We want to consider everything and see what happens.
As good practice in my experience in 10 years and doing these studies, that is, it's best to start with this approach of kind of everything on the table. Let's just start with as big an area as we can, put everything on the table, and not start with 2 or 3 schools, but let's just say, hey, throw all the schools up there. Now, as soon as we can, let's go through some meetings, let's go through some input, let's understand what the issues are everywhere. Then as soon as we can, let's start to take some of the obvious ones off. Then let's narrow that down more. Then let's narrow that down more. Well, that's what this process is. We're kind of in the beginning of the process. But by the time, and if I understand the timeline correctly for Salt Lake City School District, is by early fall, you're going to narrow those down with some specific options, perhaps, and then, again, be more specific. But
more meetings, more public comment, more public meetings at the board. September, October, November will look different than now.
It's really fun at that point.
Yeah.
So this is, in essence, the timeline. I won't read through all of that necessarily, but let me just say this. The way this one is lined out, it's kind of a 1.5 year schedule, where for the July to February, so for the previous year, that's the thinking about it. That's taking input. Anyone can provide input, whether it's a board member or administrator or patron or audits or anything else, where we're taking all input we can to even consider, should we have a study, where those things, and kind of go through a vetting process with the options committee of the district to at least take some legitimate concerns. Then, after that process, you come back to the board in February and say, hey, this options committee, and correct me if I'm saying this wrong, but the options committee comes to the board and says, we're recommending this study or these studies or these areas to be studied.
At that point, at that point, it was still superintendent and cabinet looking at the data from our own data, from our IT department, from data's demographics. My role in this as the boundaries, it just started in February when the board said, yes, let's look at the whole district.
Okay. So vetting process, internally, they're looking at things. Then this is where you are now, March to May, meetings, big picture process, initial feedback, things like that. Through the summer, we're starting to get some core options and generate a smaller list of viable options over the next few months. And again, Brian mentioned because of the accident, he's kind of a few weeks behind, but
I should be all caught up by August. So take a look at this timeline. It's going to be about 2 weeks, 3 weeks off right now, but by August I'll be caught up, I think. And you'll see that on the next.
Yeah, but that's, sorry, I should have brought that up earlier, but that's really where we're at in the process. So into the fall, again, The board, first board meeting in August, the board must approve recommendation options for further study. September to October, more open houses, more meetings. We'll really get into the meat of things at that point. November and December are, it can still be feedback up to the last minute, that you're taking things to the board. And typically, for most districts, November is what's called a first reading or an initial approval. And then December is typically a final action. And
Ours could go as late as January. I don't know. It's our first time through doing this,
Right.
so, but sometime in that December, January, it's gonna be, are we doing something or not? If we are, this is what it is.
And let me tell you this from my experience too, be patient with the boards on this. These are big, weighty decisions. Kudos to the board for taking this on. It needs to be taken on everywhere, but they're hard. And I understand, I think everyone is starting to understand how difficult these are gonna be. There are no easy solutions. We can have 500 meetings with 1,000 people in each one, but, and we still will not come up with a perfect solution. What you are looking for is the best solution, number one, for students, and for a lot more positives and negatives, or advantages and disadvantages. In the end, someone probably is not going to like change. Change is hard for all of us, especially as adults. I know I had this little tidbit too. My first couple of years, I really lost sleep, and it bothered me when these changes or closures would happen, because I was really worried first and foremost about the students. I learned very quickly and reminded from my days of teaching as an administrator that by and large, the vast majority of students are very resilient and adapt to change quickly. I'm not saying all, there are absolutely exceptions to that, but for the most part, students do. Us adults, we have a harder time with that. And sometimes rightfully so, I get it. You buy a home because of a school area. That's typically what people tell you is number one. And when a district makes a recommendation to change some of that, that changes a lot of things for you. A lot of impactful things in your life. So that's understood. So bottom line, that's kind of the process. That is the year to year and a half process. That again is what we've talked about already, more of the detail. And this is where we are now. So here we are at the library. There's another meeting on Thursday, and another next Thursday. These were compressed a bit because of Brian's accident. I think we were supposed to have some of these a few weeks ago, and but we're still trying to get as many as we can in. So at this point, I really want to, well, actually, there's a couple more. Input. Again, I've already mentioned this, but please, please, please go to the website. You can see there, it'll tell you, click on the green button, bottom left-hand corner, and you see the graphic, scroll down, then your comments. And these comments don't just go to Brian, but they go, my understanding is to every board member.
Right, I'll compile them and organize them by, these are comments from parents, these are comments from teachers, it's an organization piece, but every board member gets all the comments.
It's critical, not just questions, statements, reminders. You can have as many meetings as you want to, and Brian's going to understand, he's been in the district a long time, he's going to understand a lot. He's going to understand the data. The district will understand the data, but no one can understand everything, especially about specific communities. These meetings especially are about the nuance and things that you want us to remember and to keep in mind that maybe won't be as obvious to some as others. So this is where a lot of the great feedback comes from. So again, please share this with neighbors and friends, and so they can see it and do the same. Okay, so that's, the feedback is absolutely key. So here we are. Let's try to answer some questions. I don't know, again, how long, when does the library close? It might not. Okay.
We've got to tell at least 7.
Yeah, we'll do the meeting until
Yeah.
7, but if anyone wants to stay after that, I'll stick around as long as until we get kicked out. But questions, comments?
Are the other meetings doing the same thing that you just did, or will they be the next piece beyond?
Good. So we're talking about these other 2 or 3 meetings coming up.
The Thursday and
It's basically a repeat.
Yeah, it is.
that's what I thought, yeah.
Then you'll start seeing new meeting stuff early in the fall, September, October, November will be more as the timeline progresses. We're just trying to do this kind of meeting in a number of different spots to give people options.
And don't feel like you can't come to all of them. If you want to come to all, come to all.
It'll be like, yeah, I've heard his joke 4 times.
That's right, that's right. I hear the same thing over and over. So, but I can tell you this, it's the same information, same slide, PowerPoint. However, when you get to a certain community, there are certain questions that always come out
Yeah.
for that community.
Yeah.
So that's the difference, is typically in the questions.
I have a question about the precinct, so I teach precinct 3, and knowing that the schools in that area are going to blend, I'm wondering if teachers will be getting information before January, February of 24 about just how we can meet the people within our blended precinct.
So in other
Not so
words-
that we're just on the building, but there's a lot of processes that have to take place for those transitions to happen.
I want to take a generic stab at this.
Yeah.
Big picture, but Brian, please jump in if there are things specific to Salt Lake City School District. You're absolutely right. There is a lot of transition that has to happen. Because sometimes when I say decisions made in December or January and it takes place next fall, it almost freaks me out because there's a lot to do in those coming months. So there are typically transition teams, transition meetings that have to happen for the next 6 months to make sure all of those things are done, starting with teachers and employees. In most cases, again, I'm on a big picture, I'm not telling you what the Salt Lake City School District is going to do. In most cases, districts will have someone from HR or benefits come out to the school or hold a meeting somewhere to tell you, based on your negotiated agreement in your district, how that happens. You know, whether priorities to go to other schools. Again, in most cases that I've seen, we're not saying if a school closes, then 20 teachers lose a job. Because again, we need teachers still. If those students move, teachers have to follow the number of students, maybe not those exact students, but we still need teachers for those students. So, but HR and the district will help with that process. But most of the time, as soon as a decision is made, sometimes before, they can come out and try to tell you, okay, here's the process. When a decision is made, we'll meet with you and tell you the priority and discuss the negotiated agreement and all of those.
You're bringing up, I'm making note of this, when you bring up a very good point, and this is our first time as a district through doing this way. We have districts around us that have been doing this for 10 and 20 years, this process. It's our first rodeo, so thank you for that comment, and it's one that I will share with superintendency as well.
This, and I'll just add 1 or 2 more things. There are a lot of things in those transition meetings, not just where a teacher might be the following year, but yeah, how do you welcome those new students to the new school? You start working with that principal as soon as possible. You don't wait until next fall, typically, to have those meetings and get to know them. You start doing things in the spring, where you combine some groups, have activities to start to meet each other. The parents meet each other. Sometimes you have to disband or stop or not have one school community council, but now you have to create new PTAs and school community councils to include the new groups. So there are some things that have to happen there. There are budget issues. Teachers want to know where I pack my things up. Where do I put them? We put them on a pallet. When are they picked up? That and 100 more. So I'm going to lean back on Brian to get that kind of information out to you guys and what that will look like. But just know that it should be, as soon as that decision is made, there are a lot of meetings and questions that will come up. Yes.
Relating to what she said, I'd say 2 things. We've discussed this stuff before, and she made what I thought was a brilliant point, which somehow you could try to integrate into this process. Most of the parent, family, stakeholder groups, they're organized by school, and they see this as a zero-sum game competition. But the reality is some of the schools will close. and all the students will be together. And the area concept is really great because if you can build some sense of solidarity within those areas, the people can be working together, thinking less about competition and how to have the best possible outcome for their children. The other thing, based on your responses, is I would say transition planning needs to start now. Really. So that in January, you can hit the ground running in terms of melding the future.
When you say,
Separately from this whole process.
and I want to clarify, when you say transition planning, what would that look like?
Some of the schools are going to be closing, and student populations will merge, and you want to build these relationships. You need to start planning for that now, so that in January you're kicking ass. And I went to school in the 70s, and the school district I was in 6th and 7th grade had bus bombings. This was in metropolitan Detroit.
What did you call them, bus what?
Bus bombings,
Oh,
fighting desegregation. I wasn't conscious of that at the time. But I do remember this never happened before in my schooling, and I had a tough childhood, so I went to lots of schools in lots of cities. But from the transition from 6th grade to 7th grade, we went on a day trip to the new school. To our junior high. And this was like 72, 73. But those are the kinds of things that need to be part of this what I mean by transition planning. Because you want to set yourself up for success from the outset, not failure. And there's going to be a lot of animus. But by setting up a team to deal with that now, you can reduce that. I have another point, and this is just in general.
I'm going to make one point. Yeah,
Okay,
I'll
sorry,
forget real
sorry,
quick,
sorry,
and then
sorry,
we'll
sorry.
finish. I agree that a framework of a transition and what that looks like and the types of activities and the procedures for all of that, as soon as the district can get that settled, they should do it. The only concern is, of course, you can't start combining schools because that decision has not been made.
It's about the process.
Right,
not
the
about
process,
the
yes.
specific.
Because as soon as you start getting, hey, you know what, school A and school B should probably start doing activities together. Of course,
No,
hey,
no,
you guys have
no.
made a decision already.
Not till after
But
January.
yeah, processes
The
and those
process.
things, absolutely.
And the investment, because the second point is more general. So I'm reasonably new to this area, but I lived in a big city for 30 years that went through multiple processes, multiple school shutdowns, but also massive charter expansion with very limited oversight. And most of the students in the system are from low-income areas of the city. They're also those families are less interested in investments in the schools in their neighborhoods because they just believe the schools in the higher income areas, white areas, are going to get more resources, which I found very interesting. But something that I think is true in that district, and I think is true here, and I do have a planning background, but not in schools, there's very limited investment in what we might call market development, in programs, and even in school marketing, and doing those kinds of development activities. Seeing the data that you did for each area was really interesting, because to see that Area 4 attracts out-of-boundary students or out-of-district students is really key. It'd be interesting to do a study of those families to see why, and can those opportunities be replicated in other parts of the city? I don't know. I think part of it is just proximity.
There's proximity, there's
Meaning
friends.
Sugar House, because, I mean, that area 4, abuts Granite School District pretty closely. And they close schools in that area, which might have impact positively on the abutting schools in Salt Lake. But the thing is, I mean, when I say programs, I mean things like, more language,
Dual language gives you
and all that kind of
There are a lot
stuff.
of
I mean,
programs.
the big thing in DC, where I live, was Montessori. Although the school district wasn't willing to pay for actual accreditation, they did Montessori Light. But those kinds of programs are student attractors. So I know within this process, you don't have the headspace or capacity to focus on that. But that's something that going forward, the district needs to do, if only to maintain its ability to retain students, let alone
My
attract.
experience has been most districts are actually fairly aware of that issue. It's the challenge of, as always, public funding oftentimes. So for instance, hey, we know this program attracts students. Can we put that program somewhere else and have the same success? Maybe, maybe not. Because in order for that program to succeed, people have to get their own transportation there. Can the students we want to be there get their own way to school? And if not, are we providing transportation? And if not, then we're doing that on our own dime. You see the rabbit hole you can go down with some of these issues. And they absolutely, those discussions and conversations absolutely should be had, for sure. I just wish there were easier, more simple solutions to those. But that's the challenge that the district leadership and the board will have. Again, it was brought up yesterday, and we mentioned ourselves today that it was, Area 4 that has the 3 gifted and talented programs. Okay, is that something to look at? That'll be the district to decide that. Dual language immersion, where are special education, special classes, or I don't know what they're called here, but
Schools,
hubs, ESL, all kinds of programs, and trying to geographically spread those out to where the populations that need them can have access to them.
And then you have to retract because based on your data, most of this areas track pretty closely to in area students, with the exception of area 4.
Right. And sometimes, because again, we're an open enrollment state, which means you can go to any school you want to, assuming one, there's capacity and you can get yourself there. Sometimes it's as simple as a sports team, a certain coach, a certain teacher, drama, performing arts, drill team, I mean, you name it. There are certain people that attract students and they'll come from all over the city just to be there. And so again, it's not just, I think I told you when I first got this job, I was kind of excited because I thought this will be fun. I'll just move puzzle pieces around and that's where the new students will go and I'll solve a lot of problems. Boy, was I naive, because again, that it's a lot more complicated than that because of all the reasons we just mentioned. And with open enrollment, some states right now are not open enrollment. You live in that area, that's where you go, period, end of story. Well, they can make boundary changes and count on what's going to happen. But I can tell you this also, my experience has been in this state, if you make a boundary change, it takes anywhere from 2 to 4 years minimum to see the full efficacy or impact of that change. Because if you've been to that school 4 years and needed a boundary change and you want to stay there, you're in 3rd grade and you want to finish your last year or 2, you're going to try to permit and remain there, oftentimes. And so, but that's normal. That's to be expected. Those are things that the district has to think about when you're making projections, when this boundary changes and when that school closes. Because what we're trying to project is not just student enrollment. What you're really trying to project is student, more particularly parent behavior. And that is trickier. I mean, we have MIT and Harvard PhDs that can't predict the economy really well a couple of months out. And we're trying to predict also human behavior for these kinds of issues. So it gets complicated. But we do have some pretty good models and systems that help us. more than you asked for, sorry. Back here.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up 2 points. I grew up in Salt Lake. I went to Lawrence Elementary School. One of the things I wanted to bring up was, I totally understand that schools up. It's just how it has to go. Look around the valley, it's a lot of places down. Everything's changing, right? And for me, one thing I wanted to bring up is, our lives are tied to these places. And I think for a lot of people, when a place gets torn down that you met your wife in or you met your best friend in, that's going to hurt. And so one thing I wanted to bring up was maybe whatever schools you decide to close, if those can be preserved digitally in some way and have it be put out on YouTube so that you can take a virtual tour of your old junior high school or your old elementary school. Because my dad and my grandma, they both went to Eastside, and that got torn down. And they may have their yearbooks and have pictures, but there's no, all-encompassing view of the school.
Right.
And I just want to make sure that you got torn down, or Emerson got torn down when my wife went, that we could still say, hey, look, kids, that school doesn't exist anymore, but here is my school. We come look at it. So that you just have that piece of your history kind of preserved. And then the second thing I wanted to mention was a lot of these schools, I know that they're kind of the green space for their neighborhoods. And so I think that whatever the district decides, that if they can make carve out a piece of each one of these schools that they close and to preserve it as green space, as kind of a memento for that school, perhaps. I think that will just help ease that fear and that anxiety. Because I think a lot of people don't know why they're worried about their school closing. Because it is just built. But when it does close, like I said, a little piece of you kind of dies. Because that you'll never be able to visit that place again. So that was just my 2 comments.
And
just
great.
Preserve those places.
And I'm going to preface my comments to both of those by saying I am not speaking for Salt Lake City School District on this. I'm going to tell you again some general themes I've seen over the years based on those 2 things. Well, I know, for instance, that with the consideration of Highland and West rebuild, there's been conversations already in the district about how do you do some of that? How do you save some of those physical things? How do you save the memories? How do you save some of those? So I know that's out there. Most districts do a pretty good job of that, whether you digitize everything or what. But you're absolutely right. I don't think we want to admit it. And so just a very, very quick personal story. 2 years into this job, I was kind of flippant cavalier about that same thing. I said, hey, it's a building. Come on now. You're going to move, in fact, to a new building. Aren't you excited about that? One morning, I opened my computer, and I grew up in Tennessee. I'm not from here originally. And someone sent me a link to an article, and I might tear up saying this. It was my old high school, and they were tearing it down. And I sat at my desk, and I started looking around to see who was watching me because I was tearing up. Because I did the same thing. I immediately started walking myself down these hallways. Started going through a flood of memories about things that happened there, my friends, and good times and bad times. That's natural. That's good. We should be connected to things. We need those connections. So absolutely, if anybody tries to deny that those are real, they are. And they should be. That's a good thing. As a history major, I love old buildings and old things. And so I feel that. So that those are tough. So I know Brian's aware of that, and we've talked about this a little bit.
Thanks for your comment.
Well, and I think when you did whatever school you closed, I think having a goodbye open house or something, just let the public have a chance to just say goodbye.
Maybe get a brick or a piece of the building. Schools oftentimes do that.
Yeah.
If that's assuming the building is not there anymore. But something you can touch and tactile that you can touch and say, this was part of my school.
Right.
I think it's great. Yeah, that's
Well,
possible.
I've seen it with church buildings.
Right.
Because the church buildings get torn down and they kind of just, it's
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
And I think that for a lot of people, they had a chance to say goodbye.
Especially if you went there, your parents went there, in the
Yeah,
city, your
exactly.
grandparents went there, or whatever. These are important. They really, really are. Absolutely. The other part of that is what happens to a building. Would it be a park or would it be something the district or, again, the board decides that? Again, this is very much where I'm going to step aside and say, in Utah, the law is that even if a district does decide to surplus or get rid of a property, First right of refusal goes to the municipality where the building resides. In other words, they get a first chance to buy the property. They can keep it as a school building, they can knock it down, they can do anything they want to with it. But a municipality gets the first chance. If they refuse or say thanks but no thanks, then it can go on the open market. That's assuming that the district does that. My experience has been most of the time, districts don't want to get rid of their property because the amount of money you get back out of that, depending on the property and where it's at, it's a nice little infusion of cash short term, but long term, it's usually not worth it for most districts. You may even, the district may even knock a building down if it's old. They can lease it to a municipality, county, city, whatever, and make green space, or they may keep the building up because the district needs other district programs at that building. A lot of things can be done. That's very much a board decision, but understand that a lot of people get that question all the time. Hey, what are you going to do with the property? Most boards have no idea for a while. That takes a little while to process, think about, talk to stakeholders and say, what should we do here? And so, but most of them tend to want to hold on to those properties in some form. I know districts do a lot of leasing where they will lease a property, hold ownership, and say, contract says county can use it, it's a green space, it's a dog park or whatever, and you lease it for a nominal amount, and at least it's good for the community. So, again, I'm going to say that one more time. I'm not telling you what Salt Lake City School District is going to do. I'm telling you my experience overall with what I've seen other districts do. Yes.
In your experience, when schools close, what happens to the students and the teachers who no longer have their building? Do they all go in a group to one of the remaining schools? Are they split up? What happens to those students?
I've seen all kinds of things happen. Generally, most districts understand. What you try to avoid as a district is splitting up one school into a bunch of small pieces going to different places. Most of the time, it just makes sense to send all or most, half, maybe as little as a third that are broken up into other areas. So as many of your friend group goes with you as possible. Because it gets, the smaller you splinter out, the more complicated it becomes. And it typically just doesn't make sense if you look at boundaries, to do that. But I don't know, again, I can't speak for this district, but most studies I've seen are simply not just an effort, but just a byproduct of changes is looking often that they could all go to one school, all the students, or maybe two schools, maybe three, but it gets tough when you even get beyond two. So, but you have to consider other things. It's not just how many kids can we keep together. It's, holy cow, we just split something and now I got a state street to consider. Is that a safe walking route? I got a railroad track. I got a tracks line. I've got all of these other issues to consider. So it's not just boundaries. And I think there is acknowledgement of keeping kids together as much as possible. And I wish there was a straight answer, but I guess we're going to see more of that come fall when specific recommendations are made. Is that a good enough answer for you? Probably not.
And I also want to add that for teachers, more than likely, what happens, what we've seen the only other two times I've seen this happen in our district, in the 25 years I've been in our district. I should back up and say that over the last 12 years, we've been hiring 75 to 110 teachers a year. So teachers being out of a job, if they're a teacher who's in good standing and is a competent teacher, which most of our teachers really are, then they're going to have a spot somewhere. Most of the time, it is looking at, hey, you're a second grade teacher, and we need a third grade teacher at this school over here. Here's another second grade teacher. We need a first grade teacher over here. Teachers don't usually travel in a big group the way Steve has described that students try not to divide them up. the purpose isn't to try to divide up teachers, but we do see more splintering among professional staff than we do with students.
Yeah, and even to go a step further, that often depends on not just what the incoming school needs, but the credentials of the teacher, experience of the teacher, and all kinds of things. Or some teacher might say, you know what, I've been at this school 20 years, but it's closing. You know what, I want to get closer to home. So I'm going to try to work at another school on purpose. There are all kinds of things that come up for the staff.
So a clarifying question on that. If you're the school that remains open, there's no guarantee that you're going to same position in that school.
Yeah, no guarantee, but I would also say that there's really no guarantee any year. Depends on if you're if a teacher is certified to teach K-6.
Right.
Yeah, they're at that school, but they could be a 6th grade teacher 1 year, a 3rd grade another.
True, but my question is, if your school remains open and you're expecting other classrooms to come, will you not be guaranteed your position in that school?
That's a good HR question.
Absolutely. I am so hesitant to even try to go there because there's so many factors. You're talking your district negotiated agreement, your credentials, what that incoming school needs.
I think this is
all
the
of
kind
those
of
things.
information teachers need,
Right.
because without it, we live in a vacuum of anxiety.
Yes,
Because, and it also creates, competition, and like what Richard was talking about, that competition. That we really are not invested in having that competition there, but these little vacuums are what create it.
you are confirming what I've seen over and over, and that is unfortunately the angst that school staffs start to feel even at this point when they think, uh-oh, could that be my school? What's going to happen to me? Yes, as an HR district is comfortable sending, at least to explain the process.
Right.
You know, these are the way we handle these issues. We should know that.
And then we also worry not just about ourselves, but about our counselors, who our students are used to, that our lunch people, like these are relationships that have big
Yes.
meanings to kids. So, you know, because they're seeing this person, you know, throughout their elementary career, and if a school gets closed, then that, is there gonna be funding to carry those, so we have double counsel?
Right. Right. I agree 100%. And we do try to avoid that, but I know, like you said earlier, you alluded to this, and that is, I hate to see it, but I do see sometimes where communities feel like they get pitted against each other because you know the area we're looking at, and kind of you start to think, okay, they're looking closer at this area, and is it going to be our school or the one next door? You start cheerleading for your school and all the great things it does, and trying to compare yourself to the other school. As much as I want to try to tell the community to try to avoid that, part of that, I get it. We just do that as humans. But if you're aware of it, the first thing to do is be aware. But if you're aware of that, just try to help each other with that. It's hard.
Yeah.
And
There's a question back here.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't be right on time, so you may have covered this. My question's about cost. I know that the auditor revealed that there was, the district was already paying an overage in terms of keeping the school open that are.
Right.
So it's already costing us. But what is this whole, the survey and the data collection, told us all about being expensive, and maybe cover this, so I can just stay after and find out. But is the district release numbers in terms of what the overall cost is for things like the transition for consultants or the planning committee? What kind of numbers and where is that coming from? What that's costing the district to kind of embark on this whole process?
so some of the references to DO's demographics were the projections in costs that were incurred in 2017, 2018 demographics, making those projections. Many of the projections that we have moving forward based on what we learned from them has come from our IT department, so current employees that we have with our IT department, with Sam's department, and those kind of numbers and predictions there has been a more recent, consultant group that, Jan Reed, what was the name of the group that more recently was used, and can you speak maybe toward that?
Yeah, I can.
Jan Reed's our, sorry, go ahead, our communication.
Any communications for the share. Hi, so the Davis demographic study was done 4 or 5 years ago. It's been a year now, 5 years ago, and those costs were covered already. In the 21-22 school year, another firm called Applied Economics revisited that data just to make sure, is this still the way that the district is trending? Is there anything else that the board needs to be aware about when making big decisions? And that cost was incurred in that school year. So there hasn't been any big cost yet, since a lot of what we're doing is being done by current staff. If there is something in the future, that's something we can pass along to the board to make sure that as part of the transparency that I know that they want to convey to the community, that cost is shared as well. So thank you for bringing that up.
Hope that helped. And if you have other questions, feel free to come up after.
I guess along those lines, mentioned that there were individual schools that were recommended for closure years ago. And recently we saw a news item that instead of closing those schools, they built new buildings for them. So, seems like some of the legwork has already been done, so I understand that you're concerned with the cost on the process that's done. So how much weight is going to be applied to that decision that has already been made?
I'll tackle a multi-pronged question. A good one though. So the last time that the school district closed schools, I think I was still in the K-12 system in the early 2000s, so it's been a while. And a few years ago, the superintendent at the time had recommended looking at Benyon Elementary because enrollment was low at that school, but no decision was taken. So that answered in terms of the school's recommended closure. It's been 20 some odd years since they were actually closed, and only one has been recommended at that time. And then the other 3 schools that were built in the last 5 or 6 years, that's Meadowlark Elementary, Liberty Elementary, formerly Lincoln, depending on what year you're looking at, and then Edison Elementary. And those 3 schools were rebuilt for a couple of reasons. One, seismic safety. They were the last 3 schools that hadn't been retrofitted, and that's what was recommended to make sure that the kids in those neighborhoods had safe buildings. In particular, if you look at the last 2 schools that were built, Meadowlark Elementary and Edison, they are on like the outskirts, the farthest west parts of the city. From Meadowlark Elementary, for example, I could stand on the playground and look into the inland port if you know, out there in the northwest quadrant, right? So we mentioned that there are a lot of factors that go into decisions like school closures or boundary realignment. One thing that is important is to make sure that kids have a school in their neighborhood, a school that they can get to easily, and that kids living on the edge of the northwest quadrant of the city, you know, looking into the inland port aren't having to commute really far to get somewhere. A school isn't just a place for education, but it's also a community hub. Someone in the meeting, I think you may have stepped out already, mentioned that often it's the green space for that neighborhood. So it was important that we keep those schools as close to the students as possible, and those are a couple of
Another question. You can go 2 in a row, that's okay.
Well then, okay, but then, what do those, so they're rebuilt, there's one that still was on that short list. How their enrollments, you know, I don't want anyone to lose their kids. But I just wonder again about what the weight of the previous study compared to this current study, how that's going to be.
Yeah, and I'll clarify a difference. This is a population and boundary study. The other studies were just demographic studies, just professional developers coming in and giving us trends to look at over the next couple of decades. Whereas this study specifically is to look at our elementary school boundaries in Area 1, Area 2, Area 3, and Area 4. So the other study didn't look at the specifics of school communities. It didn't analyze programs where are our special education hubs.
But that still looked at enrollment, right?
It looks at enrollment, yes.
Big factor was the big driven why we're going from down to 4.18.
There wasn't a study after that about how to use the demographic data to shrink the schools.
So
That's why, I mean, I'm just looking up because I only know this from my neighborhood next door. One school was closed in 2004 called Rosslyn Heights. And it's like, that was the last time a school was closed. That's 20 years.
right.
But I remember reading, I'm pretty new here, but I remember reading about that demographic study in the Salt Lake Tribune when I moved here. So that's like 2019, or maybe I read it about it in 2018, and I was here visiting. And I was surprised, just because, you know, the school, I mean, the city's growing. But then I grew up in Oakland County, Michigan, and in the last 15 years, most of those cities had 2 or 3 high schools, and at least one is closed. And I thought, well, you know, the population's shrinking. I looked it up, and actually Oakland County's grown by 100,000 residents. It's the demographics of households and how many children there are. You know, it's not the baby boom. And so there are fewer students.
And he actually summarized it very specifically at the beginning of his comments. He said the studies that were previously done, those are going to be tools studies. There's a number of factors. In one of the early slides in this presentation, you saw a list of 12 things that by policy the board has taken into consideration. So that demographic data, that's one of those 12 problems.
Again, absolutely right. An area can grow by population, yet still need to close schools. We see that now, not just in Salt Lake District, but again, look at other districts. Look at Utah County and the growth there. And they're considering closing 2 to 5 elementary schools. Jordan District, with all the growth they've had in the southwest part of the valley in the Harriman area in the last 10 years, and they are considering, they closed one last year and have a couple of others they're considering. No matter what, you might have old schools with shifting populations and demographics. Great changes.
Well, Granite just closed 3 schools in the Mill Creek area. And Mill Creek is, again, a growing area.
You know, it's popular everywhere.
Yeah, households age.
I'm going to defer to Brian.
We appreciate all of you coming. If you'd like to stick around and any other questions you have, I know that we anticipated right around 7 o'clock, but we're happy to stay if you would like to talk more. I've taken 3 pages of notes. I appreciate the comments, 4 pages of notes. And so those 2 will be passed along to the school board as well. Oh, flyers. There's some flyer information right back there as well that should be helpful. And this PowerPoint, give me 48 hours or less and it will be up on the, on the district website under boundaries and planning. I'll have that up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.